Welcome to the ASCO Voices episode of the ASCO University Weekly Podcast. My name is Alexander Drillon. I am the Clinical Director of the Early Drug Development Service and a member of the Thoracic Oncology Service at Memorial Sloan Kettering Cancer Center, and an editorial board member for ASCO University. Today, we feature an ASCO Voices episode which was originally presented during the 2018 ASCO annual meeting.
So next, it's a real privilege for me to introduce Dr. Pat Loehrer, although he's making me feel old. I first met Dr. Loehrer 22 years ago when I was an intern at Indiana University. He is the professor of medicine there, and he's presenting a talk called The Call. Dr. Loehrer is the director of the Indiana University Melvin and Bren Simon Cancer Center and the associate dean of cancer research at IU. He was the founding chair of what was then the Hoosier Oncology Group, or HOG, now known as the Hoosier Cancer Research Network, for 20 years. Since 2004, he's also been leading collaborations with Moy University and Moy Teaching and Referral Hospital through AMPATH, the academic model providing access to healthcare, which includes clinical and research faculty from numerous academic institutions from several countries. AMPATH Oncology mission is to develop a sustainable model for cancer care in sub-Saharan Africa. Dr. Loehrer.
I suspect that there's not a single person in here who hasn't thought about dying from cancer. The question is, who would you call? Now, obviously, you talk to a medical oncologist, you probably talk to your family and then a best friend, but what about after that? Who would you call? Well, a few years ago, I was helping our daughter move in to a new apartment in Boston, and I got a call from Dave Flockhart. I could see his name on there, and my wife and daughter still remember this conversation from their side. Hi, Dave. Oh, shit. Dave Flockhart was a professor of medicine in the University Cancer Center researcher, an internationally known researcher in pharmacogenomics. He was born in Scotland, the son of Australian immigrants. His father was a scholar in divinity. He was the eldest of 5 children. He ended up going to Bristol to study biochemistry, and the week that he left for Bristol, his youngest sister, who was 12 years old, died suddenly in her sleep. He went on and got a degree there, and then went on to get his PhD at the Welsh School of Medicine, and then later on came to the States with a postdoc at Vanderbilt University, and there he got a faculty position. He did this for several years, and I think probably thinking about Fiona, he decided he really wanted to get more into medicine, and so he applied and got into the University of Miami, where he went to medical school and finished that, and got his MD degree 11 years after his PhD. He went to Georgetown for his residency and then did a fellowship in clinical pharmacology where he joined the staff. A few years later, we recruited him to Indiana University to head our division of clinical pharmacology, and there he founded the Indiana Institute of Personalized Medicine. He's an extraordinary individual. He was, to describe him, he was about my height, my build, high forehead, gray mustache. Quite simply, the handsomest guy I've ever known. He was just a lot of fun, but I have to say he was more of a colleague than a friend. We'd never broken bread together. So on that Labor Day weekend when he called me up, the other side of the conversation was he said, "Hi, Pat, I've got a glioblastoma." Now, Dave didn't call. There wasn't a sense of pity in his voice or angst or fear. It was as if he knew he was going to get cancer, and he was just surprised it turned out to be a glioblastoma. We talked about his symptoms. He had gone down the stairs and had some weakness and made the diagnosis himself on his right side. He noticed a little bit of a tremor in his hands, ended up getting a CT scan. He said he was going to have surgery in a couple weeks because his father had died and he had to go back to Scotland for a memorial service. It was really a tough week for this guy. He came back and we one of the things he said in this conversation, though, was that he only told a few people because he had a grant under review. So he told me and another fellow named Eric Melvin, who was head of the Center of Bioethics. So if we flash forward a bit, basically Dave had surgery, went to rehab, got out of the hospital, came back home, and Eric Melvin and I decided we would see him on a Sunday morning. We went to Starbucks. David had given us his order, some venti flat white thing with, and he said, oh, by the way, can you get a pint of milk for me too? Who gets a pint of milk at Starbucks? It costs $12. It comes from lactating llamas, and it's, Dave never paid me back for this. Anyhow, that's a different story. Not that I've forgotten it. So we got there. We thought we would be there just for a few minutes, just to be polite and say, how are you doing? I know it's been tough. We figured it would just be a few minutes, and then we would get out of his way. We sat down at a table, not unlike this, tall, and we sat there for 2 hours. He explained the illness. He explained his symptoms, how he presented. He explained rehab and the people that he met there. He met a guy who co-wrote Margaritaville with Jimmy Buffett, who is independently wealthy now just because of the rights for this. And he talked about the kindness of the nurses there and the diligence and how he learned to speak again. We had a wonderful visit, and Eric and I thought we had done what we needed to do and left. The next morning, we both got a text from Dave, next Sunday, and so it began. We met with him every Sunday, every other Sunday. He wanted to keep it private initially, and then he decided that he really wanted to make his illness a teachable moment. And so he invited a fourth member to the group, Barbara Lewis West. Barbara Lewis had been worked with NPR. She had her own program called Sound Medicine and interviewed us in the past. She's got a wonderful, sultry voice that you will hear here on occasion in terms of the tape messages here at ASCO. And so Barb came in, and we had these conversations week after week. The conversations, we talked about all sorts of things. There was no agenda. We talked about our family and friends. David turned out was estranged from his ex-wife. He had 3 children, all of whom lived on the East Coast. His siblings, he had a brother that lived in Oxford, another one that lived in Scotland, and his sister lived in Perth, Australia. So he had no family that was here in Indiana. He had lots of friends all over the world, but no family support structure there. We talked about all sorts of things, including the concept of the median survival, which we think of about a bell curve. And Dave said as a patient, it really hits him hard, that you should be able to talk about the tail of the curve, and that we don't know where you're going to sit, but you very well may be on that tail of the curve. The median survival time for glioblastoma is around 14 months. We talked about the generosity. There was one experience when he went to Cleveland Clinic for a second opinion. And while he was there, he got lost with his brother. And there was the dean of nursing that was there with a bunch of nursing students. And he asked for directions. And the dean of nursing said, follow me. And they walked about a quarter mile, and she delivered him to the clinic. And he was so moved by that. So as these went on, this was just a wonderful explanation of what was the friendship that we had that we were developing over the few years. On the medical front, Dave received surgery. He had radiation therapy, temozolomide. He had the radio frequency, I don't want to say the name because we'll get in trouble. He went on checkpoint inhibitor. He went on a clinical trial. Unfortunately, the tumor just continued to progress. Symptomatically, Dave noticed some tremors in his hands. He told us to speak a little bit more slowly as we had our conversations because he was having trouble with the multiple conversations going on. And as time went on, he developed these neologisms. He'd create new words, words that didn't really make sense. Barbara Lewis, on one visit, took him to Eagle Creek Park, which is in Indianapolis, where he just ran around like a kid, and they just had a great time. And then she took him for ice cream afterwards. And it wasn't the place where they had tubs of ice cream. It actually had a list of the names there. And Barb cringed a little bit as she asked him what kind of ice cream he wanted. And he smiled and said, chicken noodle soup. So Barb got him some cherry vanilla ice cream. She thought that was close enough, I guess. He liked it and drank it, but she's still to this day, he's not quite sure that was the ice cream that she wanted. Dave was honored a few miles south of here. The University of Chicago gave him an award, the Leon Goldberg Award. and he came up for this. His postdoc gave his speech, but he was incredibly moved that despite his disability, he received this award. A few weeks later, I brought Larry Einhorn, arguably the most famous oncologist in the world, member of the National Academy of Science, incredible human being. We brought him to his apartment. Dave, at that point in time, really couldn't speak much at all. Larry sat down with him, grabbed his left hand, and said to him, "Dave, you've made a difference." Dave's eyes welled up, and he cried, squeezed Larry's hand, and he said more in those 5 words than all of us had said today, but he hit a chord with him. I think for most people, we just want to make a difference, and Dave did. On Thanksgiving Day that year, I got a call just before we were sitting down for dinner, and I looked down and it was Dave Flockhart, but it wasn't Dave, it was his brother, who had called me up to say that Dave had just died. He was surrounded by his boys, his daughter, his 2 brothers. They'd been playing guitar and singing, and I think in terms of a perfect ending to his life, he was surrounded by love at the very end. It was terrific. We had a memorial service at Indiana University a few days later. One of his colleagues who knew him from life had a scriptural background, but talked about C.S. Lewis. C.S. Lewis was the writer of the Lion, Witch, and the Wardrobe. He was at Oxford. He had a group of guys that would get together in this pub. One of them was J.R.R. Tolkien, who wrote The Lord of the Rings. And I could just see them talking. You wrote The Lion, Witch, and the Wardrobe? I wrote The Lord of the Rings. And they would get together regularly for pints. But by and by, one of the members of the group, named Charles Woods, died suddenly, about Dave's age. They didn't expect it. And for months afterwards, they mourned his death every time they got together. And finally, C.S. Lewis said, I miss Charles terribly. But what I really miss is what we were when he was with us, what we were when he was present with us. And so that really explains how Barb and Eric and I felt. There was something magical with Dave there. I'll flash forward a little bit. 6 months later, they had a memorial service in Scotland, and I decided to go with Debbie. We had the opportunity to do this, so we went there, and we were able to meet Dave's boyhood friends. One of them was an all-Scotland rugby player who said that Dave always bragged about playing rugby, but he was horrible. We met his classmates. We met his family. We were able to spread his ashes there as we dedicated some stones in their behalf. And I was able to say a few words to the family, the people who didn't know him after he left Scotland, after he was in his 20s, who didn't know that what the impact Dave had on the field of medicine and what he had on the impact as far as us. So let's go back to the beginning and go back right now. And I'm more convinced than ever, by the way, that I'm going to die from cancer. Sorry. But the question that I ask myself again is, who would I call if I was diagnosed tomorrow? Yes, I would tell my wife, and I would tell our boys and my daughter, and I would probably get Larry Einhorn. But who else would I call? And more importantly, perhaps, even if I called them, who do you think would answer? Truth is, I don't know. But I hope to find out. Thank you, guys.
The purpose of this podcast is to educate and to inform. This is not a substitute for professional medical care and is not intended for use in the diagnosis or treatment of individual conditions. Guests on this podcast express their own opinions, experience, and conclusions. The mention of any product, service, organization, activity, or therapy should not be construed as an ASCO endorsement.